Through the pre-dawn darkness of a German winter morning, scientists of the BBCP, the Bighorn Basin Coring Project, walk in a cold drizzle from their hotel. They catch a tram that will take them on a 20-minute ride to the University of Bremen's Marham Center for Marine Environmental Sciences. All of the rock cores the team removed from 3 drill sites in north-central Wyoming during the preceding summer are here to be sliced, measured, described, photographed, and sampled, and finally moved to protected storage. Over a 2.5-week period, these researchers are beginning to collect raw climatic data from a time called the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, when the Earth's average temperature spiked between 5 to 7 degrees Celsius, about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, causing drastic changes to plant and animal life. This rare continental coring project, born in 2007 and funded by the National Science Foundation, is currently producing clues to help us understand the Earth's current thermal excursion called climate change. The BBCP is a complicated project, and it was not months, but years in planning.
We had a workshop that I organized to bring people together to talk about the idea of drilling these beds. And the main focus of that is that we have these great exposures, which you can see behind me, but it's very hard to get down to really fresh material, and a lot of recent geochemical methods that we hope to use and want to use to try to answer some of the scientific questions can be affected by weathering and so forth. So there are about 27 different scientists, it depends how you count, that are working on this project. Some of them are students, some are postdocs, some are faculty, they're various sort of different flavors of scientists, but and they're from various countries, US, the Netherlands, Germany.
It's not only international, but it's intergenerational, and we're training the next generation of people to be interested in early climate.
Scientists really don't work individually anymore. The problems themselves are too big, they're too complex, and I think the interesting problems are in particular too complicated to allow a single individual to solve those kinds of complicated questions. So I think most of us are looking at bigger scale and more complicated questions that really require us to work with collaborators to bring out and to ferret out the most interesting part of the research. I think for me the big benefit is that it's a big multidisciplinary team. And I enjoy it because I look at rocks, but I'm very interested in the bigger picture of what was going on during PETM time. So there's this lovely link between the rock record and the plants and the animals whose fossils are found in these rocks.
All experience is about the past. We can't study the future. It hasn't happened yet. The better we understand the past, the better we can conceive what might happen in the future. So here's a chance to study a global greenhouse warming event from the beginning through it to the end, to see how long it takes, to see how it affects the biota, and to have an idea what the consequences might be of another greenhouse warming event.
The story being told by the rocks to Coring Project scientists actually began 70 million years ago, when eroding material from several mountain ranges in what is now northern Wyoming was draining into and filling the Bighorn Basin. Year by year, million years by million years, this material was deposited and compressed into stratigraphic layers containing information about the environment during the continent's distant past.
The Bighorn Basin was formed during the Laramide orogeny, which is this period from the late Cretaceous to the early Cenozoic, so something like 70 million years ago to 50 million years ago, when the mountain ranges that now form the margin of the basin were uplifted along these high-angle reverse faults. So these things sort of popped up, big pieces of Precambrian crystalline material that pop up along high-angle faults. So you have this now down-warped area next to the uplifted area So you have a perfect place for erosion in the mountains and perfect place to accumulate the erosional materials that come out of the mountains in the basin next to it. The basin was filling with sediments, and the climate was sort of subtropical probably. That's what we have a lot of evidence to suggest it was much more sort of tropical and warmer than it is today. And it was a environment of a meandering stream with big floodplains. And most of these red beds that you can see behind us are paleosols, so ancient soil horizons that formed on the floodplain. And those are the deposits that we're really kind of targeting in these cores. And within those paleosols are lots of fossils of different kinds, primarily vertebrates. So that includes mammals and reptiles and birds sometimes, but also some invertebrates, snails and things. But these are most famous for their vertebrates, in particular the mammals.
My research started as an attempt to understand where horses came from. Very quickly we showed that there's a layer here, a level we can trace, above which we have horses and below which we never find them. And as we investigated that layer in more detail, we noticed, it's pretty hard to miss, that it's bright red in color. And then pretty soon we figured out that the horses, instead of being so high at the shoulder, are only the size of a Siamese cat. And they're about this high at the shoulder. So they seem to be dwarfed compared to what we normally think of a dawn horse being.
They appear in the fossil record very rapidly, and they appear at the same time there was a major global warming event that we call the Paleocene thermal maximum, which is a kind of the type example of a hypothermal. Their initiation occurs in less than 10,000 years, and they last maybe 100,000 years, and that's all very rapid geologically. So to some degree they're analogous to the kind of global warming we're going on today, and in particular these hypothermals like the PETM are related to major perturbations to the carbon cycle. So there's some release of carbon into the mixed ocean atmosphere system from some reservoir, and we are trying to figure out what that reservoir is.
BBCP scientists toured many sites for the purpose of selecting possible coring locations. Their targets, 500 to 800 feet below the surface of the basin, are sedimentary layers deposited during the PETM.
And during that workshop, we developed a science plan and started talking about the logistics of actually carrying out drilling in the basin. And from that point then, we wrote a proposal to try to get money to carry out the drilling, and that took probably a year and a half, 2 years to finally get the money. And then once we had the money, now we're actually doing the drilling. But I would say for anybody who's thinking about a continental coring project, my experience is that each one of those has been quite a bit easier than I thought it would be from the beginning. And in particular, if you can find the right people to help you with each one of those kind of segments of the project, someone who has some experience, then the whole thing can come together quite easily.
Early into project planning, Clyde consulted team member Dr. Kurt Johnson. Perhaps Johnson could share some drilling suggestions based on his 1996 Denver Basin project. It involved coring more than 2,200 feet below the eastern Colorado town of Kiowa. Scientists from all over have used the Denver Basin cores to learn about ancient Colorado and climate change. Turns out that Johnson himself had spent years before the Denver Basin project thinking about how a PETM-type event could have once changed his state's climate.
You know, one of the more unusual ways that we gather scientific data is to drill holes into the earth. And we don't just drill holes, we use a special kind of drill bit called a cylindrical bit, like this one. You can see right through the bit. And that actually drills down around rock, and we can pull up actual cylindrical cores of rock from the drill holes. That allows us to sample a complete section of rock. And an outcrop usually can only get 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 feet. When you drill a hole, you can get as many feet as you want. So in the Denver Basin, we were trying to understand the geology and stratigraphy, the layered sediments of the Denver Basin. We drilled right in the middle of the basin, took us 7 weeks, we cored over 2,000 feet of sedimentary rock, and we have this amazing record of the rock and the geologic time. And then we can look at the fossils in the rock, the fossil pollen grains, we can look at volcanic ash beds, and we can use the core both to create a timeline for the basin and to look at climate change through time in the basin.
In March 2011, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science hosted the BBCP team. Scientists working in various earth science disciplines like sedimentology, pollinology, and geochemistry met with other team members to finalize plans for the project.
Who is identified to flag the samples, you mark this position, and then
Many in the group had never before worked together. Many had only superficial knowledge of other team members' areas of study. And understandably, almost nobody knew very much about large drilling operations. It should be noted that in the American West, many drilling companies have experience with scientific and exploratory core drilling, as well as oil and gas production drilling, so assistance was at hand.
We're drilling down right through the rock and keeping all the cores, so we have a continuous record in fresh rock of the whole sequence before the warming event, during the warming event, and after the warming event. So we're perched here on a place where we have the beds wrapped around us on three sides. That lets us see the surface exposures well, and then by coring right in the middle, we can relate what we see in the fresh rock to what we know from the surface.
One big reason to drill these rocks, even though they're well exposed, is to try to get fresh materials. And to understand these hypothermals, probably our best hope is to use some of these advanced and emerging geochemical methods that involve organic geochemistry, biomarkers, and things like that.
It's summer 2011. Traveling the narrow road atop Gilmore Hill, the coring camp begins to come into view. This particular site, unlike some others, did not require grading. An access point from the road to the site has been completed for the drill rig, other machinery, and an RV trailer. Drainage to the roadside culvert is ready. Water for the site, thousands of gallons each day, is trucked up from a nearby municipal water facility to Gilmore Hill. Decisions between drillers and scientists about lengths of runs, target depths, coring bits, fluids to be used, and shift coordination between the two teams have been made. A safety meeting has been held. The coring mud has been mixed. Only at one BBCP site was drill mud actually necessary. Scientists prepare for on-site core processing with shelter, tools, working surfaces, a scale, permanent markers, and core storage. The core drilling rig is truck-mounted and is totally hydraulic in operation. From hoisting the tall rig to spinning the drill bit, lifting the cores, pumping water or mud down the hole, all is done with hydraulic fluid under pressure. The diesel engine that powers all this runs 24/7. You get used to it, sort of. The drill string is lowered to engage the target rock. The drill spins and starts to cut. The drill cuts down 5 feet. Normally the length would be 10 feet and the core would be cut in two, but the BBCP team decided on 5 feet to maximize core recovery. For those who might wonder, science worldwide does work in the metric system, but U.S. drillers work in feet and tenths of feet. So, when in Wyoming, do as the drillers do. The driller sets what's called a core catcher, which breaks the core off at the bottom and grabs it so it can be lifted out of the hole. All of the core is saved, and there's no need to bring up all the pipe and bit every time. Once at the surface, the core, in its liner, is extruded from the core barrel and handed to a scientist. This is the point at which responsibility for the core is transferred from the drilling crew to the science crew. The drillers send the barrel back down the hole. The bit spins up, cutting rock, downward and back through time. Meantime, scientists drain excess fluid and carry the core to the processing area where they cap it, blue for top and red for bottom. They measure it, cut it into sections of less than 150 centimeters.
Nice cut.
So it will fit into the D-tube storage containers at the core repository in Germany. The core is labeled on sides and on caps.
PC 11 2B 117Q-1.
Small holes are drilled in the liner to let fluid drain. Then the cores are put on racks and later in the transport trailer. All information for each core and a preliminary lithological description is made based on what is visible through the plastic liner. The information is recorded on a log sheet and finally entered into a database on the computer. Polecat Bench commands the high ground north of Powell, Wyoming. On a western promontory jutting above the farmlands, roads, and streams of the modern landscape of the Bighorn Basin sits another BBCP coring site. The high drill rig can be seen for miles around. Core drilling is non-stop, with science crews and drill crews working coordinated shifts through day and night.
A typical day on the drill rig is you appear at your at the shift change. Typically, there are two crews that would be working 12-hour shifts. So drilling almost always, I think, occurs on 24-hour time cycles, right? So you basically are drilling 24/7, and the science crews come in for 12-hour shifts, as do the drilling crews. The things you would do during a typical 12-hour shift would include processing all the core that comes up that the drillers are pulling up out of the drill hole, curating that core, making sure that it's labeled and that we're keeping all the appropriate records of each core piece, that those cores are being set aside in the right kind of environment that you want them in, whether that's to dry them or to keep them cold or whatever.
After years of preparation, fundraising, team building, proposal writing, and scheduling, Will Clyde admits to being thrilled to see actual cores, complete cores, beautiful cores, coming out of the ground in the Bighorn Basin.
When the cores start coming out of the ground and they're actually complete and there's rock in these liners, it's very exciting for all of us because we've put so much work into this to get to this point where we're actually putting the drill string down into the ground. To actually see the core come up is really exciting. It's in beautiful shape, it's very complete.
Good science is only possible after very accurate data collection. When a core comes up 200 meters into the light of day, or the dark of night, it isn't just put on top of a tall pile. It becomes the responsibility of the science team on duty. Obtaining clean, continuous core qualifies as a great success.
So we make predictions about what we might find at certain depths based on our study of these outcrops, and it's always heartening when those predictions can come true.
The Wyoming cores have been in cool storage since their arrival here weeks ago. Now they're moved to the slicing room where the team is ready to saw the cores lengthwise, one half of which will be photographed, scientifically described, and finally stored in the core repository, while the other half will be scanned and then sampled for project research scientists. Since the density of the core varies as the saw blade passes through it, the best way to assure smooth slicing is for the operator, Dr. Will Clyde in this case, to control the movement of the saw by pulling it along with a rope. His concentration on the spinning circular blade allows him to accurately and confidently cut through the full length of each core. After slicing, the two halves of the core are rinsed in their plastic liners and prepared to travel the 30 and 40 meters to different lab locations. The first half, the archived half, is wheeled to the digital imaging area where it is dried and then carefully placed on the bed which moves below the head of the imager camera. Centimeter by centimeter, the core's surface is captured in a series of digital frames. The very high-resolution images are arranged side by side and displayed on the nearby computer monitor. The core number is referenced to the image and stored in a digital folder on BBCP project servers. Once all metadata is secured, the archival half core is carted out of the digital imaging lab, down the hall, and into an area where the material will be scientifically described and written to the project record.
The next section is a bluish-gray siltstone that has very fine sand in it.
Once the description is complete, the archival core is removed from the table for one final transport, only 15 meters from the lab. The working half cores are moved from the splitting area to a color spectrophotometer that measures the true color spectrum of the sediments. This is another source of data for looking at stratigraphic patterns, orbital cycles, or sedimentary changes in the core. Notes are made on color in the core descriptions, but those can vary by observer. This instrument provides a non-biased measurement of color. Each core half is covered with a type of plastic wrap to retain moisture. During each centimeter of travel on the moving instrument bed, light from a calibrated source is reflected off the core. Wavelength data, color, and reflected intensity is digitally captured and included in the project records of that core segment. These working halves are the specimens from which study samples are being removed by team scientists. This sample material has in some cases been special ordered by scientists studying ancient pollen, for example, so they can understand the diversity and density of 55-million-year-old plants living during the PETM. Other scientists order samples with certain chemical compositions for their biochemical studies. Some scientists, like Dr. Mary Krause, have ordered samples with specific sedimentological characteristics because she studies ancient stream deposits. One additional instrument is used to study the cores, the X-ray fluorescence or XRF core scanner. It's a non-destructive analytical tool for relatively rapid determination of the chemical composition at the surface of split sediment cores. It can make very high-resolution measurements identifying elements between magnesium and uranium. The XRF data document geochemical variations through time and also document the fine-scale link between climate and the sedimentation on land or in the oceans. On the average, one measurement takes between 30 and 60 seconds. However, at spot resolutions of no larger than 0.2 to 0.5 millimeter, scanning several thousands of feet of Bighorn Basin core takes many months. The written description we saw Dr. Gingrich preparing, as well as the high-resolution digital images of each core and the samples extracted from those working halves of the cores, will first be available to BBCP team members.
We have what's called a one-year data moratorium, which means that the scientists have, on the project, have a year to work on the data before we release the data to the rest of the scientific community. And after that year, then the data will be accessible by other people in the scientific community, and the cores will be accessible as well. So we're just finishing up the core processing part of the project. So we've been working really hard for the last 2.5 weeks processing and sampling the core. So we have all these samples. They're going to be shipped to the scientists on the project, and we're going to archive all the digital data we collected, and people are going to work on that for the next year or so, trying to come up with answers to these questions that we started out with at the beginning of the project.
Just a few steps down a hallway is the entrance to the very stable, very cold, very large multi-level core repository. It is cold here, plus 4 degrees centigrade, and filled with well over 150,000 meters of core, mainly from deep ocean coring projects. But also represented are those cores from continental research sites, such as the Bighorn Basin. They are stacked high and wide, sealed in tubes, supported on trays in these wire racks, which are easily accessible by motorized lifts. The archival half cores remain intact and are carefully stored here for future generations of Earth scientists who will return here someday to work with improved tools and a more detailed knowledge base to learn more about Earth climate. The mates to the archival cores, called working halves, will also end up here. This is a planetary record for the ages, kept stable and ready for all scientists to see and compare and study, much as rare books are kept safe in the great libraries of the world. There are many empty wire racks in the Bremen Core Repository. This is the space where present and future generations of scientists will place their cores from new continental and oceanic coring projects. This is the space where new cores will allow old questions to be paired with spectacular new answers. This is the space reserved for the future of Earth science.